It looks like it's 7:03, so I'll call this meeting to order. This is a meeting of the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Commission for the City of Urbana, and it's, what, March 15th of 2016? So maybe Barb will start at your end of the table and just go around and everybody can introduce themselves, whether they're staff or a commission member or a proxy for tonight. Just kind of introduce your name and what organization you're from or who you're representing.
Barb Steele, I'm the recording secretary. I work with the Public Works Department for the city.
Jeff Marino, resident of the City of Urbana.
Cynthia Hoyle, CU Safe Routes to School Project and League Cycling Instructor.
Brandon Bowersox Johnson, I'm the chair of the commission.
I'm Kevin Garcia. I'm a planner with the City of Urbana.
Craig Schunkweiler, a staff member and feedback member.
I'm Susan Jones. I'm a feedback member and representative of RIDE Illinois, or the League of Illinois Bicyclists.
David Jamie, engineer with Urbana.
I'm James Radel. I run the Campus Bike Center. I'm filling in for Stacy DiLorenzo as the university representative.
I'm Lily Wilcock. I am the active transportation coordinator at the University of Illinois.
Great, welcome.
I'm Chris Hawk. I'm a U of I police officer.
Hey, nice to see you.
Oh my gosh.
It's the famous Hawk.
Yeah. Well, you see names in email and it's like, oh.
Right.
I'm Matt Yoder. I'm with the Champaign County Regional Planning Commission.
And I'm Audrey Shee, Urbana resident.
Brad Bennett with the Public Works Department. I'm the engineer.
Okay, welcome. Yeah, well, we have a quorum. So the next step is approval of the agenda. And I think we did have one suggested change to add to the agenda. One of our future topics listed was to talk more about enforcement of traffic laws, which is something that some of the commission members had suggested. But since Chris Hawk's here tonight, we can actually start that conversation tonight and talk about that. So if somebody wants to make a motion maybe to move 8B up into new business, then other than that, we can approve the agenda with that change.
I'll move 8B to the current agenda and talk about it tonight.
Okay, a motion by Sue. Does anybody want to second that?
I'll second.
Okay, seconded by James. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, great. Well, we will proceed.
Unless lights are back.
Next up, we have minutes from previous meetings, and I think Cynthia even sent in some corrections, which Barb already put in the copy that's been distributed. So we got a couple corrections in. Does anyone have any other corrections or comments for the minutes?
We spent a lot of time going through them, so. But it was faster that way.
Yeah, they're long. Okay, does anybody want to make a motion to approve the minutes as corrected?
Also moved.
Okay.
Second.
By Cynthia, second by Craig. Any other comments or changes? Okay, well, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. Thank you. So next, public input. Is anybody here to give public input? I don't think so. Okay. Then we will go to unfinished business, and the bike master plan is item 5A here on the agenda. And I think maybe Craig, you'll kind of give us an update. If you recall from the last meeting, we voted to approve it, but then we also talked about just some feedback and revisions that Charlie Smythe and Jeff Yockey and others were wanting to make. So Craig, maybe what's the status of that?
So after our meeting, the bike plan went to the Plan Commission. And at the Plan Commission, there was more discussion concerning Mr. Smythe and Mr. Yockey's comments. So it was decided at that time the Plan Commission tabled the approval of the plan to revisit their comments. So staff has met with Mr. Smythe, and we've gone over some of his comments. We have to take a look further into his comments, and the plan right now would be for staff to vet through his comments and Mr. Yockey's comments, see what can be easily attained or reincorporated. I think staff at this time is going to do the work. RPC's involvement is essentially finished with the document, so we do not have possession of it right now, but we will be getting it hopefully this week. And then we'll probably meet again with Mr. Smythe and Mr. Yockey just to hammer everything out. Then we'll take it back to steering committee because there are some structural changes to the plan. And then we'll bring it to BPAC likely in the April meeting for discussion and possible approval. If it's approved, then it would go to Plan Commission probably 2 days later in April, and then possible approval by council in May.
Okay.
So that's the best case scenario this time.
Okay. Cool.
Will there be time for the BPAC to review the plan
Yes.
before we vote on it?
Yes.
So we could, yeah, you guys could like get us an electronic copy or something of
Yeah.
it that had some idea.
We'll show it with track changes, so you'll be able to see the change that is being recommended. And I'm hearing that Kevin here will be doing the work.
Like
Okay.
2 weeks before BPAC?
Well, we'll try to do as much as we can, but we have to, if put it this way, if it is short duration, we may bump it to the next meeting. So we won't rush it, but we'll try to get it as soon as we can. So, okay.
Cool. Any other questions, comments on the bike master plan thing? And Jeff is here and walked in. I mean, your ears were ringing because we were just talking about the bike master plan and kind of where things are. I know we went past public input and you weren't here, but were you here for any public input or did you have any comments to weigh in on? Okay.
No, just listening.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Any other bike master plan discussion, or should we move on to some business items then? Okay, let's go to item 6A is new business. This is the sidewalk network inventory and assessment, and you might remember that Barb sent us about a month ago a big PDF document with a bunch about this regional, Champaign, Urbana-Savoy sidewalk network inventory stuff. So tonight, we're going to hear a bit about it. And I don't know, Craig, do you want to do any more introduction or just?
Well, I'll turn it over to Brad because he's
Okay.
been the one leading the efforts for Public
Okay.
Works.
Okay. Well, I'm pleased to have Matt Yoder here today. He was the staff person from the Regional Planning Commission that led the effort to do this. I mean, this is truly a remarkable study. They went out and inventoried every sidewalk in Urbana, Champaign, and Savoy, so you can understand what a massive undertaking.
They're not thorough.
They are. And the information that they've collected and provided to us in the GIS format is already paying dividends for us. We're already able to use it to identify potential repair locations. But I don't want to steal too much of his thunder, but just many thanks to Matt for taking time out of your busy schedule to come here and make the presentation tonight. With that, I'll let you be wowed by Mr. Yoder.
Well, thanks for the invitation. Let's see if we can get my slides here. Maybe. So as Brad said, I'm going to talk a little bit about this project, which has been taking place over the last 2 years. The report that you saw was just finally approved at the CUATS meeting in February, so just recently approved. So I'll talk a little bit about sort of what our goals were in the project, what data we actually collected, and then some of the analyses that we did related to condition, compliance, connectivity, and priority areas. These were the agencies that were involved in the project. And our goal really was to create sort of a comprehensive database of the sidewalk network for the entire urbanized area, the entire community. We wanted to do that in order to assess condition and compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. ADA was a big part of sort of the driving force behind this, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. We also wanted to identify sidewalk gaps, places where there are missing curb ramps, and priority areas for improvements. And then finally, we make some policy recommendations. These are not sort of specific recommendations for particular locations. We approach this really as sort of a data collection exercise and a study. It's not a plan as such, but hopefully it will feed into plans that you're doing, that the City of Urbana is doing, and that the other agencies are doing as well. So our data collection took place within the urbanized area. We had what we called the priority collection area, which were sidewalks adjacent to public streets, as well as some sidewalks off-street in the campus area. In total, about 690 miles of sidewalks that we looked at. We collected data for 4 different types of features: sidewalks, curb ramps, crosswalks, and pedestrian signals. For sidewalks, we collected data at 3 types of locations. We did summaries for each block. We took cross-slope measurements at driveways where the slopes tend to be problematic. And we also recorded major obstructions and condition issues that we found. The measurements that we took included things like the material, the length and width of the features, running and cross slopes, vertical faults, which would be where the panels don't line up, cracked panels, surface condition, obstructions. And in the report, there's a table that goes through sort of the details of which variables we collected for which features. You can see on the right side the equipment that we use to do the data collection. I put this on here just to sort of note that these are not sort of engineering precision measurements. We had to use tools that we could take these quickly in order to be able to measure that length of sidewalk and all the associated features. But I think they do give us a good sense of kind of where we are in terms of compliance with ADA. The data collection, as I mentioned, took place over 2 years. We had teams of 2 field staff who would go out, and we usually had about 4 teams out at a time collecting data. So you can see here the number of features then in our complete database. It's a lot of data. And as Brad mentioned, the city staff now have access to all of that, including the measurements, the scores we gave features, photos, all of that is available. And will soon hopefully be available to the public as well once we get our website up and running. So I'll talk a little bit about the different types of analyses that we did. The 2 primary aspects that we were looking at in our analysis were condition and compliance. So we developed a condition index that aggregates things like surface condition, frequency of vertical faults, number of cracked panels, and with all of those things, then we come up with a composite score from 0 to 100, where 0 would be very, very poor condition, and 100 is kind of like brand new condition, essentially. We do a similar thing then for ADA compliance. So we're looking at variables like dimensions, slope, obstructions, vertical fault size. These are all things that correspond to the pedestrian right-of-way accessibility guidelines, or PROAG, which are the standards adopted by ADA. And so again, we assign a score where 0 is basically like totally out of compliance, and 100 would be completely in compliance with the standard. This is, as I note here, a preliminary assessment. We didn't collect data for all of the standards in PROAG. There are dozens and dozens of them. But we think we have a good sort of sampling that gives us a good sense of kind of how compliant a particular feature is. So I'll talk a little bit now about some of our findings and then the recommendations that came out of those with relation to compliance and then condition. So for sidewalks, vertical fault size was persistently problematic. Those places where the panels don't line up. PROAG only allows for a 1/4 inch vertical fault, which is very, very small. And so that's kind of why we see this result. We did note, though, that a lot of those vertical faults could be addressed through beveling or grinding, where the sidewalk surface is just kind of smoothed out. You don't have to actually replace panels. We also saw a lot of areas where cross slopes were out of compliance. Again, PROAG has a very strict standard, 2%, which is quite flat. And so a lot of the sidewalks did not meet that standard. And as I'm giving results here, this is for the entire urbanized area. We didn't sort of break it down by municipality. But I would say in general, the patterns that we saw in Urbana kind of reflected what we saw in the rest of the urbanized area. It was pretty similar between Champaign and Urbana. Tree trunks and other vegetation were the most common type of obstruction we saw in sidewalks. So some recommendations based on those findings. We're recommending expanding current beveling programs to address those vertical faults, Looking at installing sidewalks prior to the construction of driveways, that can help to avoid problematic slopes at driveways. Evaluating tree type and space requirements, again, to try to address some of those obstruction issues. And then increasing the minimum width of sidewalks to 5 feet. Technically, PROAG only requires a 4-foot sidewalk, but if you only have 4-foot sidewalks, you need to have passing spaces every 200 feet. So with a 5-foot sidewalk, you avoid that requirement, and it's also just easier for people to pass in general.
Or to walk together.
Right. So moving on then to curb ramps. Truncated domes are supposed to be present at the end of every ramp to indicate that you're stepping out into the street. They were present on less than 40% of the ramps in the urbanized area. Some ramps have the older pavement groove type warnings. Some don't have detectable warnings at all. We also encountered a lot of ramps that were either too steep, so above the 8.3% threshold set in PROAG, or that were long enough that they didn't even have to meet the standard for slope. Cross slopes, again, were problematic with curb ramps, both in the ramps themselves and in the associated features, the landings, the approaches, etc. So a few recommendations that we made then based on those findings: to install truncated domes where possible in ramps that are otherwise compliant, making sure that the truncated domes span the full width of the ramp. That's another requirement in PROAG, and sometimes we see that they're either not positioned correctly or they're not the right width, and so you have a gap at either side. Using combination ramps to break up long ramp runs. So that's where you would have a lower ramp run and then a landing in the middle and then an upper ramp run. And we see the agencies starting to use those more and more now. And then performing audits periodically of curb ramps, particularly with regard to this cross slope issue. That's the one that we see is the most problematic in newer ramps. So pedestrian signal compliance. We saw a lot of push buttons that were mounted too close to another push button. They're supposed to be 10 feet apart if possible. We also saw a lot that didn't have tactile arrows that indicate the direction of crossing. Locator tones and vibrotactile indicators were also relatively uncommon. So overall, you can see in the map there, the scores are pretty bad. Most of those areas are red. And that reflects, I think, just the number of sort of accessibility features associated with pedestrian signals and the expense inherent in providing those. These can be expensive to install and to upgrade. So a few recommendations then related to pedestrian signals. We're suggesting looking at policies for placement of pedestrian signals to try to address those issues where they are too close together. In cases where they can't be moved, another, or at least a step in the right direction, is to install those tactile arrows, so at least people who are blind or who have low vision know which direction they're activating the signal for. And then updating accessible pedestrian signal guidelines to incorporate some of these new design features. So I'll shift now briefly and talk just a little bit about condition and sort of the findings that we noted there. So these are the overall scores for sidewalks and curb ramps. You can see curb ramps, the condition scores tend to be better. That's not unexpected because curb ramps tend to be newer than sidewalks overall. But we did notice that with sidewalks, the condition and compliance tended to correspond pretty closely to each other, where that wasn't as much the case with curb ramps. We see some that are still in pretty good condition, but that have these compliance issues with PROAG. So a few of our key findings. As I mentioned, sidewalks had lower scores overall. Curb ramps, the main issues that we saw, at least in terms of sort of surface condition, tended to be more sort of maintenance issues, things like dirt and grass, where with sidewalks we saw more sort of structural issues, related to cracks or vertical faults, those sorts of things. We didn't collect structured data on crosswalk condition, but we noted sort of informally a lot of faded paint in crosswalks. So a few recommendations then. We're recommending incorporating sidewalks into routine maintenance programs. Similarly with curb ramps, looking at the feasibility of including those in street cleaning or other sort of maintenance efforts, since a lot of the issues tended to be more sort of maintenance things. Developing or promoting mechanisms for people to be able to report condition issues when they see them, and defining a maintenance cycle for crosswalks to address some of those faded paint issues. I'll talk just briefly now about some of the other types of analysis that we did. So I mentioned sidewalk gap analysis earlier. We wanted to look at areas that didn't have sidewalks on both sides of the street. And so we identified all of those areas. You can see them in red on the map, the example map here. And then we analyzed those gaps based on the size of the gap and the proportion of surrounding streets or streets that have sidewalks. The idea being that when you fill a gap that's small and in a neighborhood that has a developed sidewalk network already, that increases connectivity more than just putting a sidewalk in an area that doesn't have any other sidewalks. So I know this is small, but this is the sort of overall results of the sidewalk gap analysis. The blue gaps are the ones we assign sort of low connectivity value. Those are the areas that don't have a developed sidewalk network. Some don't have many sidewalks at all. And then the yellow and red would be the higher connectivity value. They tend to be in older neighborhoods, kind of more in the core of the communities. We also looked at missing curb ramps, and we did that on an intersection by intersection basis. So in our database, we have records either of a curb ramp at the end of every sidewalk or a non-ramp endpoint, which would be just where the sidewalk ends with no ramp. And so on an intersection by intersection basis, we looked at the percentage of possible ramps that actually had a ramp. And so these are the results then for the urbanized area for the missing curb ramps. Black points indicate an intersection with no ramps at all. White indicate that all of the possible ramps have ramps in those locations. And then red or pink, some of them would be ramps and some would be non-ramp endpoints. So we didn't see a really strong sort of spatial pattern here. The areas that are missing ramps or potentially missing ramps are kind of scattered throughout the whole urbanized area. So like I said, highest connectivity score for sidewalk gaps in sort of those older neighborhoods and core areas where the missing ramps were more scattered. And the marked crosswalks, as we would expect, are most prevalent kind of in the core of the community. So just a few recommendations then related to these connectivity findings. We're suggesting using existing sidewalk gap programs where possible, or establishing new programs, and focusing really on gaps with high connectivity value, those in the high priority zones, which I'll talk about in just a second, and those adjacent to bus stops. Considering the presence or absence of curb ramps and prioritizing roadway resurfacing, most resurfacing projects trigger ADA ramp updates, and so considering what ramps might or might not be upgraded as part of prioritizing road projects. Again, just prioritizing ramps in the high priority areas and then creating guidelines for installing marked crosswalks and stop bars. So the final type of analysis we did then was the priority areas, and this is actually not based on data that we collected as part of this project. These were based on existing data sets. And the idea was to identify areas that had the greatest reliance on the pedestrian network. And so factors we looked at here were things like the home addresses of people with disabilities, seniors, transit, housing density, and proximity to certain key destinations, schools, public facilities, retail. So for each of those, go back actually, we created basically a heat map showing sort of the strength or weakness of that characteristic in particular areas. So you're seeing the one for transit here, but we did that for each of these factors. And then we combined those to create sort of a composite priority score, and these are the results of that score. So in Urbana, we have two identified kind of high priority areas, one in the downtown area and one in the Florida and Philo, kind of near that intersection. So just note, we also took a little bit of a look at funding and possible funding strategies. I won't go into detail there. But like I said, we had identified 5 high priority zones throughout the urbanized area, and there are more details about those in the report itself. So some of the recommendations then related to priority areas and to funding are to look at public-private cost-sharing opportunities where those exist, tracking spending on sidewalks as a way of showing some momentum toward making these needed accessibility updates. Developing a system for prioritizing features based on things like condition, compliance, and these priority areas. Updating our sidewalk network inventory, which is something that we are planning to do. We're going to be working with the agencies, and we plan to continue collecting data every summer to keep this up to date now that we have it. And developing some sort of online dashboard to show progress to the public that we are actually kind of making headway in making the community more accessible. So that's all I have. If there are questions, I'm happy to address those.
Matt, when you start, what time did this start and then finish? How long was the duration?
The data collection portion started, I'm trying to remember, May 2014, I believe, was the start of data collection. And we finished it then last fall, I want to say beginning of November. So that was kind of the time frame for data collection, and then since then we've been working on all these analyses.
Yes, I'd point out too that this was all funded from a grant from IDOT, so the cities didn't have to provide any of the funding for it. We got paid by IDOT.
That's great. When you looked at the things that were out of compliance for vertical fall, you mentioned 1/4 inch was the standard. Did you use a different standard? Because that seems really like everything would fail with that.
Yeah, so we had 3 categories. Less than, well, actually I guess we had 4 categories. So we recorded if there were no vertical faults, that was sort of its own category. We recorded faults less than 1/4 inch, which don't present any compliance issues according to PROAG. We recorded then between 1/4 and 1/2 inch, which is what PROAG considers the range that where beveling is allowed, so you could actually go and just grind it down. You don't actually have to replace anything. And then greater than 1/2 inch was sort of the rest of them. We didn't take specific measurements.
So how did you know really bad vertical faults? Was that in a different category completely?
So we don't have kind of structured data on that, and part of that was due to liability concerns from the agencies, because those are things that can come up in lawsuits if someone is injured. But we do have kind of unstructured data about that. So where we observed really severe faulting, that was noted. And so that information is part of the database.
So you said develop a mechanism for reporting sidewalk problems. The cities, that's going to just be given as a general comment to the cities without a suggestion like who or what?
Yeah, we don't, I guess, see that as our role to sort of develop that mechanism. It's going to probably look somewhat different in every community.
But you don't think there is one now? Or
some of the agencies do have them, but it's not sort of uniform across the urbanized area. That was kind of part of our policy review, was looking at some of those mechanisms.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know if Brad or Craig want to speak to that a little more, but I mean, what
is the
as Public Works talked about, yeah, kind of what's the existing process? Like if my sidewalk has one of those vertical faults, you know, or any resident, can they call in and I know we have that fancy grinder machine now that can help fix those. Is that happening a lot? Are citizens aware of it? Or is there something there we still could be doing to get the word out or get feedback?
Well, actually, it's a very timely topic because we're actually going through the asset management system, and that's one of the things they're talking about is having maybe a more user-friendly system for people being able to report that. I know one of the things they're looking at it is see it.
Well, we don't really have C-Click Fix, but we have a connection to that. So if anyone reports something through C-Click Fix in Urbana, it automatically comes to us, and then we get that information and forward it on to our operations division for them to go out and see what they can do to repair the information.
There is a citizen's voice right now on the website, so a person can, write an email, and it goes actually for Public Works, it goes to Barb, and then she will send it out to the appropriate divisions. I will tell you right now, what happens is it does go to operations, they look at it, take a look and see what they can do. Yeah. It's like a priority system, and they get to it when they can get to it. It depends on how severe it is. If it's very severe, they may try to address it sooner than later. Some of these are a little bit difficult, particularly in older Urbana, because of the tree root issue. That's where you see a lot of the faulting.
Yeah.
So that can result in either taking a tree down, and that's kind of sensitive there. So there's just things we have to work out to get it all addressed.
So it sounds like there is a mechanism.
There is a current mechanism, yeah.
Yeah, and citizens can call in too.
Yeah.
I mean, if anything called to the administrative staff gets forwarded to the appropriate person. And it's not just for faults. I mean, we also take what we call accommodation requests. So if you're disabled individual,
right,
you're having a problem using the sidewalk facilities because they're not ADA compliant, you can let us know. And I can tell you when we get accommodation requests, those are our highest priority. We're going to fix those right away because we want to make sure we provide access there.
Yep. I had an intern who went through 2 sets of tires on his wheelchair getting back and forth to MTD because the condition of the sidewalks, and I suggested he send it into the city, and they fixed it very quickly. So that you have a special pot of money for taking care of those requests. So, if somebody has that kind of a problem, they definitely should make it known.
And then
Go ahead.
Yes. Incorporating sidewalks into routine roadway maintenance. How is it done now?
It's anytime we resurface a road, which means we take off the top and put a new layer on, we upgrade the ramps to make them ADA compliant. I would say, I've been here 10 years, we've always done it that way, and we've done it prior to that we've been doing it for a long time that way. Yeah. When we reconstruct a road, we do it. Now, the law says that if we do certain types of seal coating, we have to do it then too.
You touch it, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Yep.
So the struggle with this is obviously the funding component because we don't have any additional money. So it actually takes away from some things, but that's what we're looking at is how to make that all work. But the answer to your question is, currently for 2 of the 3, we do it right now. So.
And then would that include looking at the vertical faults or just the ramps?
Yep. We actually do we'll assess the entire length of a project. So like for instance, near your area, we resurfaced Kohler Avenue, so we assessed all those ramps as we went through, and when we resurfaced that 2 years ago. And then we looked at all the lengths of the blocks, and then we've actually extended that, like David, one of my staff members here, when we do concrete patching jobs now. So when we were up on Bradley Avenue last year, we repaired that road from Lincoln to the west city limits, and we would update ramp. We're not required to by law, but we update the ramps that are on safe routes to school routes. And we're going to do the same thing on, basically that's an internal policy that we're doing at this point.
Well, I would love to see us do a a pedestrian plan of some kind and apply for, recognition as a pedestrian-friendly community. I know we don't have any sort of extra funding laying around right now, but I'm wondering if we can't use the data from this and come up with, some goals and priorities, and use that as a plan. And I have quite a bit of data on pedestrian safety action planning, and so it's a fairly straightforward process. But it's something we might want to consider, because that's something I've really wanted us to do, and in the past we didn't have the data to do it, and we have the data now. So that would be great. One other thing I would just add is we started mapping out high priority routes for our voluntary snow removal pilot project, and we overlaid safe routes to school and high transit usage locations. And safe routes to school covered all but 3 streets of those. Springfield, really, Lincoln down east, and I think Green, and there was one other road like that wasn't a safe routes to school route. So that was nice, and it fits in the high priority scheme. We looked at that too, and having access to GIS data is helpful for that kind of programming too.
Well, I love the idea of trying to go after some ped-friendly designation, and that would sort of give us a chance to get a little outside feedback on how we compare to other cities, or how we do better over time, set some longer term goals.
Yeah. So we want to do that before we, either that or say we're in the process of doing one. I think probably would give you some credit, and I forgot the name of the program now, but.
Right, there's an equivalent to the bicycle friendly community. I think it's pedestrian friendly.
Walk friendly.
Walk friendly is
there
what
you
it
go.
is.
I think so,
Staff
yeah.
staff has discussed the need for a pedestrian master plan or sidewalk master plan. So we have some interest in there, and currently, as you noted, I mean, funding is an issue, but it's quite possible that could come forward with that.
Great.
One thing I want to note too is we do have a complete streets policy, so when staff does work, we look at that also, with the complete street, and that's part of it is for pedestrians as well. The last thing I would note is, we have a bicycle system that is award-winning, but we've also all recognized that we have a pedestrian system that is lacking, and there are some, additional needs there. And I think with what Mr. Yoder's group has come up with, I mean, you can see that there are some deficiencies that need to be addressed.
Yeah, just numerically, the sheer scale of it, and only 40% are in compliance, and we have hundreds of intersections, hundreds of routes.
The hard part too is you have to keep in mind that communities have been doing ADA for 20-some years. It's just the standards have changed.
Yeah.
So what used to be in compliant is not in compliant
Right.
any longer too.
Yeah.
It's a moving target.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask about was a bit about what you were saying, Matt, about the audit of new ramps, cross slopes. That even pretty new ramps might not have the right cross slope. I mean, are you saying that we should even be out there, like, as construction projects are getting constructed and finished, to check those? Because even brand new facilities that we're building, presently, might on day one, when the, concrete dries, be out of compliance? Or
we've seen some where that's the
Okay.
case, and I can't speak specifically for the city of Urbana, but throughout the urbanized area, there are some ramps that are basically brand new, where we measure them and the cross slopes still are not exactly within that 2% threshold, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and it seems like that's bad, and that causes more of a compliance issue. I mean, it's one thing if some old sidewalk from the 80s doesn't match today's ADA standards in terms of our legal liability and exposure as a city, right? But to have something brand new we just built and we didn't actually build it to compliance,
Yeah. That's
that
frustrating.
seems like Yeah, frustrating. We spent all the money on the expensive sidewalk and nobody checked.
Well, we have taken some measures to address that.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, the first was going down to a recommended slope of 1.5% cross slope to actually provide a little bit of
A
tolerance.
tolerance.
We do also inspect as they pour it. We have actually made contractors and developers tear out.
Okay.
In fact, kind of a most recent massive one I remember that having to be done was over for the Crystal View townhomes. They had some cross slope issues. They actually had to mud jack the panels to get them to the 2%. But I mean, 2% is a really flat slope,
They
and if
do
you're
that
not
in
careful.
Mountainous areas.
I don't know.
Yeah, there.
Yes.
I don't understand.
Yeah, I guess we're lucky our town is flat, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's much easier for us than lots of places. I don't even know how they get there.
But you know, really, the key is inspection because,
Yeah.
you know,
that's the
and there's no
Yeah.
excuse for it. We have digital levels now that actually tell you what percent slope it is. It's not like the old days where you had to kind of eyeball the bubble to
Yeah.
know what was going on. So.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah.
I did have one question kind of along those lines. Matt, in your presentation, you talked about installing sidewalks after the driveways have been poured.
Mhm.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Actually, it's before, isn't it?
What?
Before.
Yeah, sorry, did I say that the
Well, I'm
wrong
not
way?
sure.
No, you did. You said it right.
Okay. So yeah, and this is basically a recommendation from an IDOT engineer that I'm just passing along. That they are suggesting putting in the flat sidewalk first and then installing the driveway afterward.
Right.
Because what happens if you do it in the reverse order is that the driveway just continues at the same slope the whole way down, and then the sidewalk has to match whatever slope was set for the driveway.
Yeah, it should be flat where the sidewalk is in every driveway.
And we do actually require that in Urbana. I will tell you the one downside why some communities don't do that
It
is
gets beaten up.
it can get torn up during
Yeah.
construction. Sometimes we do have to go after the developer or the contractor to
Make 'em
fix
fix it.
the sidewalk. But presently, if you put a new residential or commercial subdivision in Urbana, you have to put the sidewalks in, you know, during the initial build out rather than when each individual home goes in.
Yeah.
But there are some communities, I know, I think Bloomington, Illinois, does not require the sidewalks to go until the home is built. They're actually reconsidering that policy as we speak.
That would be a good idea.
That's a little complicated, because sometimes the sidewalk has to drop down to the driveway level, and so you have to back that slope up.
Actually, should not be, actually, the recommended practice is that the driveway be adapted to the sidewalk. Not that you drop down, you should not drop down the sidewalk to the driveway, because that also then informs the driver they have priority, whereas the pedestrian actually has priority. So if anything, it should be the thing that is flat, not the driveway.
So basically, the recommended practice is if the sidewalk along the block can be a continuous, you know, a
Pedestrians have the
continuous flat,
priority in
straight
terms of
path.
that, yes.
And the
Yes.
driveways and,
Yes.
you know, slopes would be adjusted to fit that, but,
Yes.
yeah.
And just to point out too, when it comes to sidewalk repairs, if all you're repairing is a couple panels of a sidewalk,
Mhm.
you have to tie back
Yeah.
into the
Yeah.
existing.
Sure,
Yeah, yeah.
no,
So
absolutely.
even if you're putting a new sidewalk, unless it's, you know, several panels or half a block or a
You
block,
can't fix the
a
whole
lot of times
yeah.
it's still gonna be non-compliant because you are required to tie back into the existing cross slope and longitudinal.
Although we do have some sidewalks in the community that the cross slope is so bad that if you replaced a panel, I really think the stretch needs to be,
And we do chase them back. when we can.
because I know that stretch on Anderson just north of Yankee Ridge must have been put in before it was annexed into the city, because it's unbelievably sloped, and that's why you will see people with wheelchairs and walkers using the
street.
parking striped area rather than the sidewalks, because if you're already having balance issues, it's not a good place to be. And I think that was just one of the, I think we inherited that infrastructure.
Yeah, I think you're correct.
Building it.
One of the things that staff did last fall that I just want to point out is we went to it was an engineering society meeting had a lunch hour over at Pace, which is over at the southwest corner of Florida and Philo. And it was for all the engineers in the area, and we got on or in wheelchairs, and we used wheelchairs and went through the Florida and Philo intersection. And you know, for able-bodied, we don't. You know, when you talk about a quarter of an inch, you don't think that that's much, but when you're in a wheelchair, you really
Trying
do
to
feel
roll
it.
yourself over it.
Yeah, and so I thought that was.
It's enlightening.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah, you find out why the reason for the 2% crosswalk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to mention as a runner that I've seen some letters in the paper from time to time, and people wonder why runners use the street instead
Right.
of the sidewalk. And you're
For the
just
same reasons.
the speed that you're going makes it less attractive than to a walker. Even you're not able to catch every uneven vertical fall, and the uncertainty of it just makes the street a lot more attractive. And it seems ironic that our streets are so, you know, this thing for the vehicles is so very
Better and
nice
better.
and smooth and
Yeah.
and flat and so on, and the sidewalks
Mhm.
is very much a lower priority.
Well, the main thing with the sidewalk is it's usually only 4 inches or 6 inches
Right.
thick, whereas your street is thicker.
And
So that's why you'll get heaving with the sidewalk and then with the tree roots and all of that, whereas the road, you don't get that. I mean, usually that's what kind of happens. Everything goes out of compliance just through time.
Yeah.
Similarly, in the winter, the street is much more attractive because with the salt and the treads on it, it's
been
just
cleared.
much less likely that you're going to slip and fall on the street.
Yeah.
Mhm.
One other.
So just,
Go ahead.
I guess my point is that streets are for people as well. Unfortunately, we can't just shunt them aside to a sidewalk at all the times. People will be in the street and they need a right to the street for some of those reasons.
I also wondered if, Matt, you talked with Public Works some about how we all maintain this data over time. You know, like, so this data is a perfect snapshot at a time. We got a grant to build this great data set, but once staff go out and grind out a few vertical faults or replace a few ramps, like, is this a data set that Public Works here updates or adds another GIS layer of, you know, what do we think are the changes over time, or how do we keep it up so that in 5 or 10 years or something, we still have a data set that maybe has what's changed between now and then in it?
Yeah, that's a challenge for sure. The way we've envisioned it currently is that it's going to be a partnership between RPC and the agencies, the local agencies. So we've already actually gotten last year's construction data for sidewalks and curb ramps that have been replaced. We recognize that that's a hard thing for the agencies to track because those changes happen in all sorts of different ways. But we're trying as much as possible to kind of stay on top of that. So then what will happen is I will go into our database and basically mark everything that has changed as needing recollection, and then we'll have interns go out during the summer again and collect those features again so that we have up-to-date information.
Cool.
Well, it's to the city's benefit to do that precisely for liability issues.
Yeah.
And if they are able to document that they have been making steady progress and that they took care of these things, it really makes a huge difference. When I do complete streets workshops, one of the things I tell them is there is a national law firm that goes around to states and files suit on behalf of people on ADA compliance. And they frequently win. And so if you're not doing anything, you may have a firm visiting you soon. So that's really important. I think they tend to go after larger communities more frequently than smaller ones. But you know, that's a reality. You've got to have a plan in place, and you need to be able to show progress. And I think that we're doing that. So it's good. The documentation, I think, is important.
I did have another question for Brad or Craig. You guys mentioned that you go out and fix stuff on kind of as needed basis. Is there money set aside annually or biannually or something to go out and do larger project, like gap projects, where you have maybe an entire block that's missing a sidewalk and you want to construct it?
There hasn't been. I think presently we budget about $50,000 a year for concrete sidewalk repairs, and $50,000 for brick sidewalk repairs. because we do have some historic brick sidewalk areas.
We
So-
won't reopen that can of worms, but I think it was a bad decision.
But those are primarily for either, you know, where we get accommodation requests, or we need to replace a sidewalk to accommodate a disabled individual, or, you know, the calling list that we get to go through and address those are kind of spot repairs. In addition, as Craig mentioned, a significant portion of our transportation funding also ends up being applied towards, you know, fixing the sidewalks as part of the transportation projects. But most of the money is being identified to trying to repair and maintain the existing sidewalk network. We haven't done too many gaps. Sometimes there's a special project schedule, you know, for example, the Fair Lawn, Adams, Lenore. There was a multi-use path that was put in as part of that. You know, on the Broadway project, there's a partnership. So sometimes you do see where a gap in a sidewalk is able, but usually it's kind of a special project and it has to be funded accordingly.
And retrofitting sidewalks on people's property is not a fun activity.
That was actually another question I had. Do you have a cost share program if a homeowner approached the city and said, I want to fix the sidewalk in front of my house? Or is there's...
Well, actually, it's the city's responsibility to fix the...
Fix them, but if you wanted to install...
Or if they wanted to get it, prioritize it, or do it ahead of the city's schedule, maybe there's not a program.
I don't know if we have anything official, but, I mean, we would be willing to work with and talk. I mean, sometimes we've had people that wanted to have theirs replaced ahead of the priority schedule, and some, you know, I'm aware of some past instances where maybe we provided 50% match
Okay.
for what they did or something, you know.
Sort of on a case.
But I mean, if you look at the way the ordinances and stuff are, I mean, actually the city is responsible for the maintenance of the sidewalk network.
But if a neighborhood wanted, if you got all your neighbors to agree to install a sidewalk and do a cost share, I'm sure they'd talk to you. That
You
would
know-
be an activity as well.
And perhaps that's something that could be explored in a sidewalk master plan, as far as,
Yeah.
you know, funding mechanisms like
Yeah.
that. Another thing we do, Jeff, is, you know, we look for safe routes to school grants.
Yeah.
If we can, and we have applied for those in the past and received some, and this last go around we didn't get any, but we did apply there for widening a sidewalk down by what is now Preston Williams School. We also weighed that out against a GAP project at that time, but the GAP project was going to require a significant amount of tree removal. So that was, those are trade-offs that are kind of hard to weigh.
Well, that's not popular either.
But where we can seek funding, we will do that.
And we do require for new development, what's currently in the ordinance is any commercial or residential has to have sidewalk on both sides of the street. For industrial, presently you just have to have it on one side of the street. But we're in the process of looking at revising the subdivision and
Yeah.
land development code, so it's possible the industrial could be changed too to require.
That would be
those.
good, because
Yeah.
I always wonder about people catching the bus if they're only supposed to go one direction. Is the transit district often ends up with requests for the sidewalks because of employees trying to catch buses.
And there is an exemption process, obviously, if you're building out and there's no sidewalk on either side of your property as you develop it, we do, and I'm sorry, it's not an exemption, it allows them, it's like a
Delay.
deferral. That, you know, they have to agree that when there is sidewalk for them to connect to, that they have to put it in at that time and they're responsible for the cost. So sometimes you'll see in new areas, there might not be sidewalk, and it's not because the city doesn't require it, it's because it'd be kind of silly to have the sidewalk to know where it stopped at the property
Exactly.
lines.
And we have a system for tracking that.
Yes.
Good.
And in fact, we do make them go back in and put it in,
Yeah.
sometimes much to their chagrin.
Yeah.
It's not always the same people who build it.
No, it frequently isn't.
Okay, well, any other questions, suggestions about the sidewalk network inventory piece of this? Okay, thanks
Great
Matthew
work,
for all the
team.
work and for the update. And definitely, I think the master plan idea is a good future step, would be really exciting. Okay, well, let's transition into our next topic, which is also about a sidewalk project.
Yeah, could you stick in the little purple and white thumb drive in there?
This one is the North Cunningham Avenue sidewalk.
Yay.
project.
A much needed section as well.
I'm gonna
Do you want to eject the one that's in there safely?
How do I do that?
Go down to
The bottom right
You
over
see
there
that
with that
bottom
arrow.
down there with the
Here's
speaker.
another one here.
Oh.
Yeah, click on
That's
your
that.
menu button.
And then we're, it's right above there.
Yeah,
right
the
there.
little green,
done that
no,
already.
the little
That
green
was
ones, the
Oh,
right.
sorry.
It's
Green
right
check
there,
mark.
that
Push
one
your
right
button.
there.
There you go.
And then it'll give you the option to eject, so go down to there.
Yeah.
Eject. But my sentence says that there is no reason to do that.
So you can just yank it and go. That works.
Well,
I'm
not
also
until-
the man who will not put the caps back on my valves when he airs up my tires, and so
Nice.
that irritates me.
Someday we'll learn.
I've had students lose work because
Well,
they
we can
yanked
air it
them
out my
down.
Yeah.
Because the program was open.
If you know
Yeah.
your tires
But-
need air again in the future, why do you put the caps on? I
What
mean,
difference does it make?
No, only
You'll
it
just
delays
take
putting
it
the
off
air
later.
in, yeah.
They've never done anything. I've had people demand and offer to pay money for them before.
Oh, gosh.
And you're like, no. Okay.
So this is what we call the North Cunningham sidewalk extension. What we're looking at is extending sidewalk on both sides of Cunningham Avenue between Country Club / Perkins Road all the way up to Kenyon. And I guess I'll just start on the west side and work to the east side. So you can see here, there is a section of existing sidewalk up by the Mexican restaurant there on the corner. It does terminate just at the end of their, I'm losing my pointer here, at the end of their sidewalk, or
It
at the
won't
end of the
show on there,
property,
will it?
over by the, yeah, I'm not gonna be able to point. Anyone happen to have a laser pointer with
Does anyone have? I
I
don't,
didn't bring
No.
that.
I only have lights for my body.
Brett, if you want to switch spots with me, that'll work way better over here.
Yeah. I do have a flashlight.
Well, sometimes it won't let you do it on a
No, it won't do it.
particular, or sometimes I've had it, I couldn't do it on a particular kind of document.
Let's see if this improves our range.
See, it's disappearing when it gets
Yeah.
onto the.
Well, I'll just, maybe I can just get a little bit.
I've had
Old
that
school.
problem before.
Old school.
So here on the west side of Cunningham, we're looking at a 5-foot wide sidewalk. That's obviously going to extend north up towards Kenyon. As you know, part of that will obviously be having to remove sections of the sidewalk. That gets back to that discussion we had about getting the 2% maximum cross slope through there. You'll also notice we're going to make
The
some
ramp.
improvements down at the curb wraps of the intersection, as well as fixing the pedestrian push buttons so that they're properly spaced apart and that they're at the right location. On the east side, we're looking at an 8-foot wide multi-use path.
Wow.
So once again, you know, we'll start with replacing the curb ramps and redoing the pedestrian push buttons, as well as we actually have to move the pedestrian signal heads down here on this corner. But you know, an 8-foot wide sidewalk extending north from there. The most challenging part of this project, I will tell you, is working with the property owners, because
Yes.
they're, you know, this
They've
is a
been
commercial
landscaping it and.
corridor. They've all been very supportive of the project and recognized the need for it. They all said they've witnessed lots of people, you know, either walking out in the street or unfortunately, you know, walking on their property. So they're very
Good.
supportive and looking forward to it. We do have met with them and come up with a driveway closure sequencing so that we can keep access to them at all times, and not, you know, try to minimize any impacts on their business. And just to point out too, traffic control wise, this will probably be a challenge too, because we'll end up having to close the outside lanes while the sidewalk work is being done to allow them to stage, you know, trucks in to haul the earth material away, you know, to bring in the concrete. You know, it will be a disruptive project on Cunningham Avenue. But we have got our IDOT permit. I'll show you the second half, kind of the north half of this, but we do have our IDOT permit. So we've got approval from the state for it. And we're looking at hopefully starting construction up maybe the end of April, early part of May.
Wow.
So,
Yay.
And are some of the driveways or curb cuts being closed altogether? So
Yes, and in fact, you'll see that here on the next slide. We've got one, but I think we have 6 curb cut closures between
Oh, good.
University Avenue all the way up to Kenyon. So a lot of them are scattered, and they're just an abandoned driveway approach that's no longer used. But that is included
But
as.
they're nasty to get across.
Oh, yeah.
That's-
Is that what the hatched areas are?
Yes.
Oh,
I'll go
good.
back to the point.
Yeah, I just thought you guys were doodling or something.
So this is so this is an example of a curb closure. In fact, if you go out there, the businesses actually put parking bumper blocks across there.
Mhm.
So we'll be actually removing the driveway entrance, putting barrier curb along there. This will get filled in with topsoil, and seeded, and then the sidewalk will be replaced. Through
Which
there.
business is that?
It's an auto dealership.
Okay.
I'm not sure on the exact name of it.
Okay.
What's your current standard for sidewalk width?
Right now, we require a 5-foot minimum.
Oh, okay. How did you guys decide on the 8-foot width on the east side, you said?
Well, that actually harkens back to the earlier bike master plan. They had identified this corridor.
Or multi-use path for, yeah. Mhm.
So,
Remember that? Yay.
So it's designated as a multi-use path rather than just a sidewalk.
Right.
yeah, just a
right,
sidewalk.
Right.
And like I said, it will be 8 foot wide through this section, and it'll end in curb ramps up by Kenyon.
How long does the 8-foot wide extend? Does it go from University North or just, where does it start and end?
Oh, it starts at Perkins Road
Okay.
and then just extends up to Kenyon.
Okay.
And I will share with you an exciting development that might extend it further north.
Oh, that would be good.
So, and this is very preliminary, so I'm sure it's all dependent on funding. But IDOT is actually talking about when they come in to resurface Cunningham Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll point out, this is Kenyon Road here, so this is where ours end. For some reason, I'm working with them to get it fixed. They're not showing our improvements, but our improvements would come to here.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're proposing to extend the multi-use path all the way up to O'Brien. So like I said, this is very preliminary, but the yellow, hatched area there would be their route.
Hooray.
Like I said, it
You
does.
see people all the time.
Trying to,
Yeah.
Yeah, there's actually a go path up there.
Yes, there is. And you see them bicycling on it too.
And I'm not entirely sure how they're going to get through the bridge. I think that will definitely be a challenge.
I think there's enough right of way, but it'd probably be up next to the road. I don't think there'll be any separation between the road and the.
And you can see this is a significant undertaking because there's ditch grading that has to be done.
Okay.
There's probably some relocations of signs I wouldn't be
fabulous.
surprised that they have to do, or light poles through there. So
Great.
it's definitely a challenging.
Wow.
So you could have
That would be
a
wonderful.
multi-use path all the way up to O'Brien Drive.
Fabulous. You see people biking on the sidewalks all the time.
Yeah, that really gets people past some of the entrances to neighborhoods and businesses and things. I mean, good stretch. Wow.
I have bicycled on parts of that. It's not very much fun in my opinion.
Really?
Mhm.
I do, yeah.
So
Gotta do
Brad-
it at least once just to know what you should
Yeah.
never do ever again.
Builds character.
Yeah, exactly.
So when will your project be finished?
I think they have 90 days, so I'm hopeful before the end of summer. There was one business there that required us, it was a storage place, that we can't do their driveway closure between May 1st and June 30th, because apparently they cater
That's when all
primarily
the
to
people moving in and
students.
out.
So that is one thing the contractors will have to work around, is they can't do that particular driveway closure.
Oh, okay.
So, and one of the conditions we have for the businesses along there, a lot of the places that have 2 driveway approaches into their business, we talked to them, they're allowing us to do a total closure of one of the driveway entrances while the other remains open. And the contractor has a 5-day window to get, to get the new driveway approach and sidewalk in there, so they're gonna have to move pretty quickly. Now, A couple of the business only have one driveway approach, so we have to do theirs half at a time. Fortunately, most of the driveway approaches are really wide, so we think we can,
Do part of it and then.
do half of it and essentially the other half. And in that case, then they have 10 days. They have 5 days to do one half, but the contractor will definitely have to push it, because 5 days is not a lot of time to.
Especially if weather and other things. Yeah.
That's true.
So what was the estimated cost?
The engineer's estimate was $325,000. We did open bids this afternoon on the project, and it came in at $252,000. So,
Hey, that's
so it
great.
was
That's good
news.
news.
And Schaumburg
Especially after
Schaumburg out of Danville was
Kick
the
a
low
new
bid.
trail.
Congratulations.
So what's the length to?
Wow, that
And this
is-
wasn't staged that I'm asking the next question.
That I'd have to get back to. I don't remember off the top of my head.
But just to know, so we talk about, we have $50,000 annually, so this, what we have for a sidewalk is 1/5 of this project,
Yeah.
maintenance wise, to
Yeah.
put it in perspective.
Yeah, $50,000 doesn't go far at all.
Mm-mm. But it goes farther with the sidewalk with the road.
Well, then, that's true.
That was true.
Yeah.
Any questions
Okay,
about the
any
project?
questions about the Cunningham project?
That is very exciting.
Yeah, well, and I'll point out it's all funded by TIF. So they're using actually
Really?
TIF funds, yeah, to pay for the sidewalk improvements.
Oh.
Nice.
Well, I disagree
Creative.
with those anti-tip people.
There were some letters to the editor, but.
And Brad, I'm trying to remember, are we fairly decent south of Cunningham?
No.
Or the country club, or we got?
I don't think there's any bike infrastructure south of Perkins or Country. Now, in the future, I think there's some routes planned,
Don't
particularly
recall.
along Country Club Road going west, isn't there? Are there
Connect up to North Broadway, maybe?
I don't recall, I mean, I know the Park District along Broadway would want to extend it to
Yes.
Country Club Road, but I don't recall anything along Country Club Road. Maybe there is, but I can't.
I mean, there is sidewalk facilities south of Country Club in Perkins, and in fact, IDOT is going to be replacing all those ramps to bring those up to compliance. But most of the sidewalk is in the 4 to 5 foot range, so it's not really intended for multi-use.
Any other questions about this one? Okay, well, thanks very much, Brad, for the update. This is good news.
Yeah, we're excited to share it.
Okay, so our last new business item tonight is just about enforcement of traffic laws. And I actually forget which commission member asked us last month if we would talk about enforcement.
It was Mr. Rick.
Oh, okay, James, it was you.
Wasn't it?
Put on the spot here.
Last meeting, you gotta be on the
Yeah, I
spot.
think it's in the minutes.
I asked about if we were doing bicycle safety sort of enforcement, which I really liked the way they did that with the warnings and stuff. But if we were doing anything
With motorists.
with motorists,
Mhm.
because we get a lot of people getting forced off the road and this and
Yep.
that.
As
Yeah.
happened with my class on Saturday.
Yeah.
Actually,
I got screamed at today from a motorist for making a super legal, super safe left turn, and he just did not want to stop at an intersection. He was like, no, 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 no. And he honked and screamed, and I was like, wow,
Yeah.
super special.
Well, I rode past a stepped up sort of patrol orchestrated by Officer Hawk at an intersection that I had some bad interactions and some reports of bad interactions. And guess who was parked next to the intersection, keeping an eye on it? It was a police officer.
Good.
That was actually really good to see.
Cool.
Think
So
before
maybe, Chris, Officer Hawk, if you're willing to give
Chris is
us
fine.
just a bit of background about, okay, from the police perspective, what are some of the activities, and especially the campus police, who you work for, like, what are some of the activities you all do, or the behaviors you see?
Well, you've probably all seen news articles at the beginning of the semester where our chief or deputy chief talks about enforcement issues. And one of the things that they always stress, especially like now we're getting back into riding season,
Yeah.
and at the beginning of the fall semester, is doing enforcement as an educational process. Now, for bicyclists, that's typically stop, discuss what the issues are. We have the LIB cards with the laws on them. We distribute those. Several officers carry out the bike lights that have been given to the police
You
department.
had some.
I got them a couple
You
months
got
back.
ours, okay.
Right, because I had people asking for them.
I have
So-
some for Urbana too.
So we do that for bicyclists. For vehicles that cause problems for bicyclists, it's generally part of regular patrol. I have worked with shifts discussing types of enforcement, both on bicyclists who are breaking the law and also vehicle drivers who are endangering bicyclists. The ride past and turn right. I've been the victim of that, even in uniform, out on a bicycle.
It's remarkable.
But I get to do something about it. But, as James mentioned, he had an issue with a driver a couple weeks back, and he let me know about it. I contacted the driver, whose perspective was a little bit different, but was really, I guess, good for my viewpoint, is the driver finally said, well, you know what, maybe I was a little too close when I came over. And said, if I waited 3 or 4 seconds, it wouldn't have made any change in my waiting time at all. So, so the education aspect for that driver probably worked too. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, and that's why squad cars are sitting at that intersection.
And I recommended to people they should report motorists who behave aggressively, because you can't give them a ticket, but you can chat with them.
Well, actually, I could give someone a ticket if it was particularly egregious. What would happen in James's case is that I would write a citation but list him as the complainant. He would have to sign the citation as the complainant, and then if the case went to court, I would simply say I got the information from him, and he would have to testify as to what actually happened. So there are ways to do it. Most officers don't like to do things that way.
If you can talk to them and educate them, that's really the important.
Exactly. And most of the time, if it's not someone yelling or screaming at you, they're willing to accept. Yeah. They're willing to accept that there might have been some conflict that they weren't aware of. So,
And pedestrians, about enforcement for both for motorists to stop and for pedestrians.
well, pedestrian enforcement has been on track for, I think, about 8 or 9 years now, since we really made a push for the pedestrian enforcement. I come from Ohio, and when I lived in Ohio all these decades ago, if you were going to Columbus, you were warned, don't jaywalk, you'll get a ticket. And that was obvious when Ohio State would play at Illinois, because you'd have these seas of orange shirts just going willy-nilly all over the place, and clumps of red shirts going to intersections and waiting for a light or an officer to direct them across. They have a culture of compliance. I think we're getting much closer to that, because we are getting better compliance from students coming in, and people that have lived here for a while and are now understanding that there is there's benefit, but there's also pain, if, you know, financial pain, if nothing else, if you get cited for doing something you're not supposed to do. I do know that our officers stress enforcement on things that lead to injury. You know, we're not going to go willy-nilly after somebody who's just kind of cruising through the pedestrian crossing lane if there's someone 5 feet away. But if someone's in the pedestrian crossing and a vehicle fails to yield, that's obviously something that's dangerous for the pedestrian especially, and we do focus on violations like that.
With pedestrians and crossing, can you talk a little bit about what the law says with respect to when a pedestrian is considered to be in the crosswalk and when they're not, or when a car has to stop?
Well, the pedestrian is in the crosswalk when they are physically in the crosswalk. If you're standing in the curb cutout, walking that way, you're not in the crosswalk. It is much more polite to stop and wait for someone who's approaching a crosswalk, but then you're getting into mind reading. And it happened with me just the other day. There was a gentleman standing on the corner. He was walking with purpose up to the corner, and then he stopped and pulled out his phone. And so here I am slowing down to let him cross in front of me, when suddenly he stops and makes it clear he's not crossing. I was in front of Cranit Center, I think. So I don't know what he was doing, why that sudden change from
here
It's
I'm
not
crossing
You
the
got to the
whoop,
intersection
stop.
and realized you didn't know
Right.
what direction you needed to go.
And that's possible.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
you know, I was trying to read his mind, and I need some more practice at that. So a pedestrian is in the crosswalk when they're physically in the crosswalk. Vehicles have no obligation to stop for a pedestrian who is not in the crosswalk, unless it's obeying a traffic control signal. Pedestrians cannot step off into a crosswalk if the vehicle is too close for them to safely stop.
That doesn't mean they should stand there and wait until there are no vehicles coming, which is how I often see motorists
That's correct.
interpreting that.
If there's a car halfway down the block and they're moving relatively slowly, it's legal to cross out into the crosswalk and expect the vehicle to stop. What's the quote I use in my bike safety thing is, however, the laws of the state of Illinois cannot trump the laws of physics.
Right.
So even though a motorist must do all they possibly can to avoid a pedestrian, sometimes, unfortunately, the pedestrian's there and there's just nothing else that can be done, and they end up getting a collision.
Well, we will be redoing Green Street so that this is no longer an issue, but I have been very distressed by motorists when I have stopped for a pedestrian in the crosswalk and they have whipped around me and nearly run over the pedestrian.
That
Like
is-
when it's 2 lanes of traffic
Yes.
and one of the lanes
Yes,
stops.
and that is one of the things we're going to solve with the MCOR project, but that's completely out of line.
Well, I believe a while back you had mentioned comments about the high visibility crosswalk over on Bradley, and that's one of the issues that's a problem with 2 lanes in one direction.
Right.
One person stops for a
Right.
pedestrian and the other person
Fly too, yeah.
Right.
zips around.
But if you have the rapid flashing beacon, they're more often going to stop. There's pretty high
Yes.
compliance with that. Nevertheless, I would say it's much better with one lane each direction.
Absolutely. The biggest issue I see from a motorist standpoint in terms of complaining is that pedestrians actually are also supposed to wait at an intersection or even in front of Granger Library. When you have a steady stream of 100 people crossing, at some point the pedestrians are also supposed
need
to
to
stop
get-
and
Take
wait
a turn, yeah.
for the vehicles to go.
Yeah. During class change, that's a real problem for transit operations.
Exactly. But again, that becomes what priority is the education, which priority are you going to do education and enforcement on? Some of those areas you can't really stick a squad car up in there and you pull it forward into the crosswalk, let cars go
Right.
and back
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
That doesn't really work. So you get officers out on foot or something, and then it just becomes a manpower
Really
issue.
like for us to do pedestrian sting operations, and those are very well laid out now in terms of programming, but
Mhm.
the response I've always gotten in trying to do them is that they don't have money for officer overtime to do those operations. But it seems like in the fall, it'd be a really good thing to do on campus.
Well, I don't particularly like sting operations, mainly because it doesn't give, especially at the beginning of the semester, there's not much available for education beforehand. Now, we can mix a sting with warnings, but
Yeah, it's really more of an educational and PR event than it is an enforcement event. I think most of the time people don't get tickets unless they get belligerent.
and that's true. Or they have multiple,
Reinforcement.
multiple prior
Yeah.
issues.
But usually, I mean, you have cones, you have a sign, you've got people standing around, you've got a police car
I
down the street, you've got
participated.
people with vests on. I
You
mean,
would think that would be true.
well, I would
Yeah.
think that people might pay attention, but.
I participated in a lot of those kinds of events in
In
Chicago,
Chicago.
and
Mhm.
they're very successful. And yes, you'll have a lot of squad cars and people in bright colors. And people, if they're distracted drivers or if
Yeah.
they really have an issue, they're not going to see it. It's kind of, luckily, that's a really easy way to point.
One of our
people who
officers
need education.
at the beginning of the construction program on at Green and Wright Street, Everett Hall's redo, and they closed off the sidewalk
Yeah,
and put the
it's
signs
gonna
out
be a big mess.
across. We had requests for extra patrol there. One of our officers went up there about class change time, 11 o'clock or so, and was parked across from there in front of the Panda Express or whatever, and had a little bullhorn that as people start walking down the middle of Wright Street, he'd say, cross the street, get on the sidewalk, cross the street, get on the sidewalk. And was very successful at that until a bus blocked his view
going northbound on Wright, southbound on Wright, excuse me. And when it pulled away, there were 4 people standing in the middle of the street, texting and talking, and a string of buses northbound that stretched all the way back up to the transit plaza.
Yeah.
So he wrote those 4 a citation. And as he was writing them, more people were doing it. And so he's just calling people over. At the end of about 25 minutes, he had a dozen citations for people who ignored the signs, and a police officer sitting there, obviously stopping other people for probably the same thing. And they were completely oblivious to it. So education's one thing.
Yeah.
Opening your eyes is another entire
And
thing.
in most cases, I think the pedestrians should be accommodated. You should take away roadway with, barricades. But I don't think we have space at this location
Right.
to accommodate the vehicles and add in. I know on Green, they actually did do that though and narrowed it down to 1 lane for a while. So they're the pedestrians, because you can't have them crossing back and forth and then block.
Right.
So I think we should accommodate pedestrians whenever possible. Sometimes it's very difficult, and during the Incorp project, it's going to be very painful. It's going to be very hard.
As far as I think that there's actually an interest in facility and service where I work in having a motorist education program, and this would be completely voluntary, but if you'd ever wanted to utilize that, it would be like a weeknight thing once a month. And we wanted to set it up for motorists who are interested right now, currently, and to educate them on what the rules of the road with cyclists are. We get a lot of people who are very, very interested in the topic, and we want to accommodate the educational processes, and hopefully word of mouth will really help as far as making a safer campus for bikes and ped. But if you guys ever wanted to collaborate,
That's
let me know.
not an issue. And there are budgeting issues, obviously, the state.
Oh, yeah, what budget?
What budget, right?
I
So
know.
we're still functional, but
I know.
like today, instead of coming in on an overtime detail, I flexed in. I came in about 4 hours late so I could come here.
Yeah, I know it's hard.
But yeah, absolutely, we would be very happy to do that. It's just a matter of
We're gonna have
manpower.
it at the auto garage too.
Oh,
Be like
that would be
super
cool.
car fun.
Oh,
It's
wow.
gonna be great. Some wrenches, and some grease, and then some car safety.
Cool.
Do you give any kind of educational stops or any kind of enforcement between bikes and pedestrians as well on the campus area?
As possible. And one of our biggest concerns there, we have to have a minimum number of officers available in squad cars. And I always use a triple axe murder, which statistically doesn't happen. But what's much more common is you get a call for service at one location that requires 2 officers, and at the same time someone stops a car that has someone who might be a problem in there, so you have to have 2 officers available there. And then someone gets locked out of their building, and so we, obviously we're not making that a priority, but it is something that officers have to respond to. And so our shift minimum is 4 officers right now. And to get someone out on the quad, especially, there's a lot of bicycle pedestrian interactions there. Wright and Armory, not in Urbana, but it is a major intersection where planned conflict, putting the bus stop right on either side of a bicycle pathway. To get someone out there dedicated to that task either requires overtime or a large number of officers on shift. That happens, the large number of officers on shift happens maybe 1 or 2 days a week, and it just depends on where the calendar falls. So yes, we do have officers that do that. Ben Woods is one of our officers, and he loves to go out on the quad on a bicycle. And he does a lot of educational enforcement and writes a couple citations to the people who ask for them, on bicycle pedestrian conflicts.
And then can you also speak, so just because I don't bike enough, maybe, would a bicyclist, they'd be adhering to the same exact laws as a motorist, right?
On the streets.
Somebody in the crosswalk, you would obviously have to stop for them in the crosswalk.
If the bicyclist is riding on the actual streetway, they have to obey the same rules as a motor vehicle. If they're riding on the sidewalk, they have to obey the same rules as a pedestrian, in addition to yielding pedestrians and giving audible signal when overtaking them, that kind of stuff. But it is, I guess it's a whole lot easier for bicyclists to yield to a pedestrian in the crosswalk without actually stopping. And I think the spirit of that is what gets looked at a lot. I know last fall or the fall before, everything gets to be a blur after a while, but there was a bicyclist who was northbound on Goodwin and approaching the Illinois Street crosswalk crossing Goodwin. And a pedestrian stepped off, the bicyclist slowed, the pedestrian continued walking, the bicyclist picked up speed again, the pedestrian said, "Oh, I forgot something," turned around, walked right into the path of the bicyclist. The bicyclist was cited because he didn't yield to the pedestrian. Right, he hadn't stopped and yielded to the pedestrian. So there are some instances there, and officers know what to look for in terms of what enforcement's necessary. If the woman had suddenly darted out in front of the bicyclist, that might have been different, but she was in the crosswalk already. Yeah.
Can you speak about whether or not it is illegal to park in bike lanes?
It is not illegal to park in bike lanes. The state Illinois Vehicle Code specifically says that a vehicle can park in a bike lane as close to the curb as practicable for loading and unloading.
Right.
The issue
But
becomes
not for
how long
hours.
they're there.
Yeah.
But a moving truck could very easily be parked in a stretch in the bike lane for a couple hours or an entire day.
With that being said, some municipalities it is illegal to park in a bike lane.
We had done some research on that, and I just wanted to confirm with you, but we have talked with staff about maybe bringing an ordinance forward to council to make it illegal to park in bike lanes.
And then you have issues about,
Yeah.
granted that means that your Jimmy John's driver can't
Right.
park out on the street to make a delivery. Your cab driver can't actually stop in
Yeah.
front of somebody's house. They'd have to go to the corner
I'm
and
really
turn.
not enthusiastic about it. I mean, I think if we give officers the ability to use judgment, if somebody's parking in the bike lane is a regular activity, they should be.
And again,
taken into it.
that's something we need to know about, because I may not drive down the street every day and know that this car is parked there every day.
But we'll get more opposition to installation of bike lanes
Right.
if we get rigid about
Yeah.
temporary use of them. It's just, the thing that's bothersome is when there's regular usurping
Regular
of
offenders,
the
yeah.
space for bicyclists, and you see things like, on campus, we've got pictures of porta potties put in the middle of a bike path, for example, and you think, well,
That's
that
not
was, there's space to put it somewhere else. So yeah, I think that's when bicyclists really get frustrated.
There's also some high density traffic areas where it's very dangerous and unpredictable for the cyclists
Merge
they can
out.
always take the lane, of course.
Yeah.
We all know that. Not every motorist knows that, and
Not every bicyclist knows that.
cyclist knows that, and not every cyclist has all the response time in the world, especially if it was a situation where someone's pulling over to the curb to drop someone off in a high pedestrian and bicycle and car traffic area. I saw that in front of the business building today.
I would
and
counter
actually,
that the driver of the motor vehicle has a responsibility to make sure the bicyclist is cleared
Yes.
before coming to the right.
Yes.
But and we have that problem with intersections,
Yes.
that semi-permeable bike lane. The bicyclist should be away from the curb because motorists are required to turn as close to the curb as practical.
I rarely see the motorists doing, they do not understand that.
Right.
It's really.
No, and I had one tell me, I needed to be in the bike lane, and I was like, no, that's the right turn lane. And it was one where the paint was so faded that I couldn't,
So my big issue, and this is actually when Officer Hawk explained this to me, and it prompted that conversation. When people park in the bike lane, it causes cyclists to swerve out into traffic like we're talking about. And that's the number one reason motorists say they hit cyclists, is unpredictable behavior. And that's kind of my reason against it, because I understand, you got to park your car to unload different things. My big beef with it on campus is I see multiple loading areas completely vacant and multiple loading trucks parking in bike lanes. It's more convenient for them because they don't have to back around. I've driven big trucks. It's not fun to back them around when no one's around, but when there's people everywhere, it really sucks. But when you swerve out into traffic, that is not safe for anybody.
Well, I wonder with the ordinance, if that was to come about, couldn't it be drafted which would allow temporary unloading, but not basically
Yeah.
parking?
If
for
That would
the
be
rest of the time?
reasonable.
Yeah, like if someone is present with
Yeah.
the vehicle, that's fine,
Right.
but it's not like you can park your car
Or-
and leave and go do something else, you know.
Or
but-
leave it for
Like-
6 hours, I mean.
Yeah, leave it for a day and block the lane.
Does the city of Chicago have?
Yes,
that
it
they
is
do?
against the law to park or stand or idle in any bike lane.
Do you know how they handle unloading then?
Yeah, they have sting operations. If for unloading as far as
Yeah,
delivery drivers. There is there you can pull around to the alleyway, and there is a lot of alleyway. Though it is illegal to park in an alleyway, it is not illegal to idle in an alleyway and to unload. For bike lanes, it's a huge no-no. Don't ever idle or park in a bike lane. We have sting
And they're
operations.
so
They're very successful.
law-abiding in
and-
Chicago, too.
No, that's true, but it does cause this problem in such high traffic areas for
Well, like the
bikes and
motorists that
pedestrians
don't follow the law.
that it is a headache beyond
Yeah.
belief.
No, you've got
Um,
really intense traffic
You
out
can
there.
you can watch just piles, hordes of bicyclists, especially
Oh,
when the
yeah.
weather is nice. Hordes of cyclists,
Yeah.
and even in the winter too these days.
Oh,
That are forced into traffic, and the traffic's already so congested that drivers are a little bit
It's a
more
really big
aggressive.
problem. Yeah.
That it causes quite
It's
a lot of
only-
friction, for sure.
We really only have that kind of
Unnecessary.
density on campus during class change times. It's- Most of the time, this community doesn't have that.
So if the facilities exist, like you have your lane and then you have a bike lane, but somebody's parked in there, theoretically, could a bicyclist ride in the full lane, and could they stay there? Is that
Oh,
against the law at all?
The
Can I
law-
go a mile in that lane even though there's a mile of existing bike lane
There is no
adjacent to it?
requirement to be in a bicycle lane. You cannot be required to be in the bicycle lane. You are required to ride as far right as practicable when you decide it's safe to be in the far right. Okay, the bicyclist gets to decide if it's safe to be in the far right. I am a big proponent of sharrows and taking the lane, especially in the campus area. Very few times will a bicyclist be slowing anyone down for more than 2 or 3 seconds. Just I used to ride to work coming across Springfield Avenue, and I was going under the overpass at Springfield near Neal, and I was constantly slowing down for the cars that were ahead of me.
Yeah.
You can keep up with traffic in campus town.
Yeah.
But you get to decide whether it's safe for you to be on the far right. I contend the lane width is not wide enough in Champaign-Urbana. There are very few places in Champaign-Urbana where there's enough width in the lane for you to avoid doors on the right, be in your lane in a safe position, and still have enough room to the left for drivers to safely pass you. My contention is that the safest place for a bicyclist most of the time in campus is right in the middle of the lane, or even to the left side of the lane.
It's also a super interesting, historical point right there that bicyclists have. Before we had a lot of the bicycle infrastructure that we're really talking and utilizing right now. Bicyclists were on the forefront of funding roads being paved.
Well, they are the reason we got paved roads.
They're the reason why we got
They
paved
were
roads.
a powerful lobby.
And it's very interesting that some of these laws have kind of developed around the cyclists having the same vehicular rights and accesses to the roads.
And if you look at a lot of the safe riding procedures, when you go to like a stop sign, you want to actually take the lane and use the motorist to kind of feel out where you should be. If a motorist is giving you a lot of room, you can stay. I stay to the right third, which is safe. It's away from the gutter and the sticks and stuff.
Parking.
But if there's a car parked there, or the motorist is really right on me, and I think they're going to push me out of the lane, I will actually move all the way to the left. Leads to some really funny instances where the motorist keeps staying to my left,
Stopping the
and they're
oncoming.
blocking oncoming traffic. And
It happens a lot.
But that's something. Again, there's procedures and there's a lot of good safety info that can talk about that, where you actually take the full lane you were supposed to for your own safety, and for it actually works with traffic better.
Yeah. Super good best practices.
When turning, does a cyclist have to signal?
They should, yes. Cyclists are required to
And
obey the
is
same signal
pointing
laws.
okay, or
Yeah.
do you have to do the?
In the last 2 years or so,
They're
Illinois has accepted
Yeah.
that as an
Yeah.
alternative right turn.
Yeah.
It's another judgment.
Like-
call.
It's judgment,
you know,
they're
So
supposed to
depends
still
on
be,
that intersection and where the cars are.
but the law also says that a bicyclist has to keep both hands on the handlebar when necessary to control the bike.
Right.
So if you're not signaling because it's a water,
There are
rough
some places
roadway
where
or
it's too
something.
rough to let go of the handlebars and signal on campus.
Or
That's
some
position.
hands are easy to signal, but if you're turning a certain direction, at least for, you know, I have one bike that has really tight braking power just due to the fact that it's very small wheels. And you know, you don't sometimes always want to on rougher roads where we actually have on campus we have roads that are completely failed.
Right.
Yeah, you
Yes.
literally cannot let go of the
Noticed.
handlebars or you will crash. Yes.
They're very
Yeah,
close to
definitely.
FNS, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so then you can't take your hands off.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah.
Jeff?
You mentioned the bike safety quiz,
Yes.
and I was talking to Ed Barsati about getting that translated into Spanish,
Awesome.
and I think that
That'd be great.
that may be fairly soon. Is there any other language group that you
Mandarin.
would be particularly interested in?
Korean.
I think the best thing to do would be to contact someone at the International Student Scholars Services Office
Yeah.
and see what our number 1, 2, 3.
I just wonder from your interaction with cyclists on campus.
I know that there are several different Asian languages. I don't know if Chinese is the number 1 or Japanese or
Not
Mandarin.
Japanese, it'd be
or-
South Korean and Mandarin.
Yeah.
Those are our two big groups.
Yeah, I was just wondering about problem motors. Okay, second, James and Lily are two people who have roles on campus where they're very sensitive and have lots of interaction with cyclists and all. What if, and you responded to James's concern about a particular motorist, and that, James isn't just a Yahoo that called you. He's known and he knows what's going on. Would there be any value if they had GoPros and cameras? I mean, when you interact with a motorist about behavior, if they had captured that, would that be at any helpful at all for you?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Evidence of something.
It would be evidentiary. It would provide a fairly objective recording of what happened. And in James's instance, he said the car cut off across him and he had to slow down to avoid being hit. The driver of the car said, no, I was past him before I came across. And I don't know that the driver thought that he was
Realized how
causing a
close it
problem.
was. Yeah.
And
But
the
I told
camera
him,
would've-
right, and I told the driver, I said, I know who the person is that's complaining. He's not going to complain about every little thing. If he's calling to complain, it's because he was in fear of getting hit. And that's when he says, oh, well, maybe I was a little too close to him. So video is great. If somebody's got a GoPro or one of the bike-mounted camera systems and brings that to us, then that's awesome. Then we can go on. And I don't mean to disparage James, but if I didn't know James, I could have said, well, maybe he was wrong. And then it would have been a kind of a
He said, she said.
he said, she said kind of thing. And it really was, but I happen to trust James as well.
Yeah, well, I just think these two have special roles on campus.
They do. I would say that you coming in and presenting a complaint would have the same weight, or Cynthia, because I happen to know, and I know the roles that y'all have in the campus area, and that
Good
you
depth
are,
perception.
and expert perceptions, okay?
Yeah.
I know you-
So yes.
One more topic I wanted you to comment on a bit was cell phone usage. I mean, I know state laws have changed. We can't be on the phone now. Hopefully people biking are not on the phone, though I see it. But I certainly I certainly see drivers on the phone still, some.
boy.
And that, I think, is especially risky for peds and bikes around those drivers. So I guess, from your perspective, kind of where are we at as a community, and how do we keep getting the word out?
Well, one of the things that needs to be addressed is that a judge here ruled that unless an officer can specifically explain why they believe the person was texting, that it's okay to use your cell phone. That his interpretation of the statute is that it forbids texting only.
So not having
And
the
so-
conversation.
Well, I mean, it is an issue because I have looked at my phone for wayfinding when
Mhm.
I'm driving, and so, but it does put you on a peculiar position because how do you know what people are doing?
Well, and that's the point. I think the statute was not written as definitively as they thought it would be. It has been interpreted locally as being very restrictive into what you can actually stop the person for. But you know, the statute also says a one-handed talking device. Well, that's one hand. Yeah, hold your phone up. But theoretically, it is illegal to talk on the phone while driving or bicycling.
With a handheld device, you're allowed to.
With a handheld device, you are allowed to do
But
that.
you're not allowed to text.
That's correct. And it's still a gray area, and the laws itself are only a couple years old, so there's a process for going through case law and establishing what works in particular areas and all that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, basically, all we can do as a community in the meantime is educate and talk to people. I mean, and talk to our friends and family and be like, Grandma, get off the phone. You know, like are the people who are in our families who we're in the car with, if they're not being safe, we can raise it with the people in our community.
I think also too, as far as like wayfinding concern, as far as all of us being pro safety, if you ever need to look at directions, you can always pull over.
Not necessarily.
No.
Depends on where you are.
There might be a bike lane there. I mean,
Not there.
Yeah.
Get lost
I
first.
try to use the one on my dashboard. And when I'm in town, I don't need to do that, but when I'm at other places, it can be a problem. I feel like I see fewer people on their phones
it is
than
better
I
than
used
it
to.
was.
I think there has been awareness
Yeah.
raising. I think it was just really bad for a long time, but although I still see plenty of people blabbing away.
And there's this something like seatbelts where, is this something like seatbelts where, you know, we still actually see a lot of people not wearing seatbelts when we do seatbelt stings. There's a shockingly large amount, and there's been tons of information, and that's been a
Well, it's
campaign
just an
that's been
ongoing
very,
thing.
very
Right.
visible from most people are educated from such a small age, and yet we still have like a
Like the
non-compliance
10%
issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything we can do to just at least make that as, or just keep getting?
well, it goes back to the education and enforcement. People can take education so far, but eventually they have to choose
Yeah.
to abide
Yeah,
by the
both.
laws or do what's safest. And then it becomes, you're not doing it because it's the right thing to do, then you're going to have to do it to avoid points on your license or getting fines and all that kind of thing.
It has to be done periodically.
And consistently.
If you don't repeat it, the impact of education enforcement campaigns is short-lived. Three minutes max. And by themselves, they don't work well. You really need them in coordination. And so that's why self-enforcing infrastructure is such a high priority wherever possible, that the behavior happens through the way the infrastructure is designed. That's not always possible to solve all your problems through infrastructure, but the data's pretty clear. And having larger number of bicyclists, of course,
Right,
on the road
yeah.
makes a big difference too.
So
I think
yeah.
we've seen that in our community. People are more accommodating, know more now.
Okay, well, any other questions for Officer Hawk?
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so
Pleasure.
much. It's really great to have you here.
Anytime you have a question or anything, please let me know. I'm half you have my email already, so I'd be happy to help with anything.
Great, thanks. Okay, well, that's all our business items for the night. I know under the announcements list, Bike Month was mentioned here. That's May. Who has some? Jeff, do you have any info to share?
We're working on our theme, but it's going to be somehow celebrating youth riding bikes, and the youth in all of us, the kids in all of us riding a bike. That's going to pair up with, last year we raised funds for the Kickapoo Rail Trail. This year we're working to raise funds for a fleet of youth bicycles that we can use for youth bike education events.
And a trailer.
and a trailer full of it. So that's in the works, and we should be rolling that out closer to the first part of April. Bike to Work Day has been moved up to before classes are out, and this is a funny year with May 1st being on a Sunday. So Bike to Work Day is May 3rd, just because it's come early. In the past, we've had upwards of 1,000 people involved in that day, and 20% of the riders are first-time bicycle commuters.
I
So,
forgot to send you that article. There was an article, actually, I saw a piece of research, and I meant to send it to you, that shows that events like Bike to Work Day actually have a very high rate of getting people to start bicycling, or that they are one of the most effective events.
yeah, a couple of years ago, I was like, is it really worth the effort?
It is.
Why are we raising all these funds for T-shirts? And then looked at our registration data.
Yes.
And looked back at it, and it was like 20% all these years. And we hear stories of people who started then and continued. So we're going to do, while Bike to Work Day is the first Tuesday, every Tuesday through May, all the way to the end, we plan a pop-up Bike to Work station someplace, at a business or an event where we can keep catching people and encouraging people. And that will accumulate. The last Tuesday of the month is May 31st, and we're going to have a bike movie at the Art Theater and a celebration
School
and
Day.
awards night there. So that's
Bike to School Day.
Huh?
Bike to School Day.
Bike to School Day is May 4th. That's a big event. Bike to Market Saturdays. We have about 20 events scattered all through May, education events and stuff. May 22nd is a Sunday, and that's the day the Kickapoo Rail Trail is planning a celebration of that. Although construction could start.
Is it a groundbreaking?
Well, construction
Sure.
could start actually, well, technically, we did some sort of groundbreaking 2 years ago. But construction could start anytime in April if the weather allows and the construction firm gets everything together. But the 22nd will be an event during March where we'll meet and celebrate and probably have a ride. And that's a big, and we need to still draw attention to the fact that we need to rally behind the leadership of the trail and raise some more funds for that.
Yeah.
So those are some of the bigger things. We may, this is an Urbana event. Urbana Park District has concerts in the park, and May 1st is a Sunday, and so we may be in a couple different parks to pump you up. So we may show up with bike pumps. Our conviction is a lot of people
We're
have
gonna have
bikes
the
that need
girly
nothing
men
but
come
air
and
in the
do it.
tires to get them going. So we may have a couple of, especially if
Hans
it's
and
warm.
Franz.
Hans and Franz.
Black turtlenecks.
Starting May 1st and then continuing through the summer.
Cool.
So, Jeff, I had a crazy idea today that I haven't talked to you about yet. But one of the other things I do at the city is I handle historic preservation cases. And May happens to be Preservation Month as well. And we're planning to do some tours that are going to start at the market at the square throughout the month. And I was thinking we might be able to do a bike tour of historic
It'd be better to have
buildings.
old-fashioned bikes and people dressed up.
So
That would
we
be
can talk
fun.
more about that, but I wanted to share that with everybody. So if there's any interest
If you go
in
in on
getting
it, I'll
involved
go
in
in
that,
too.
I think that would be really
Sure.
cool.
That's cool.
Combine the two.
Okay, great.
Get a fleet of like 20 penny farthing bikes.
Yeah.
I'm just
We'll
gonna
tweet
walk
that,
in.
by the way. I'm
Tweet
not
that.
not
There's
riding bikes.
There's
climbing up
also
on
it.
those
Way too old.
French rides too as well. That they have like old French bikes. Those are really popular, and everybody wears their wool like kit. You know, it's a thing.
Not probably
Sorry.
not here too late.
I mean, this is definitely a community that's very niche. So
There's usually a
It's a
bike to work day
nature.
challenge between the city of Champaign and the city of Urbana. So the
Ah.
highest percentage
Urbana's been
of city
winning.
employers.
It's been no challenge.
For the record.
Trash talking.
Well, we have it a little easier because we have fewer employees, so it's easier to get a higher
In a
percentage. I
smaller
will say
land
that.
area.
I think winter is only one person or two people difference. So.
There you go. See, we've got this.
Well,
champagne.
see, you're talking about raw numbers, but the percentages, that's what we go by.
Yeah.
But hey, if you can get more people, more raw
Total
numbers,
riders.
yeah, more total riders, then we can talk.
Okay.
Yeah, we can adapt a challenge for their needs.
Yeah. I mean, it is,
more
yeah.
attainable for you.
So your
Lower the
champagne
bar.
handicap factor or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the word I was looking for.
Okay, Cynthia, you have an announcement?
Yes, we've had 2 traffic skills 101 classes. I see some of the students here
The
this
graduates.
evening. And we had 11 people go through. We have 3 people so far enrolled in our league cycling instructor seminar. We have to have 8 people enrolled by May 20th, by the way, in order for the seminar to run. So we need everyone who's been enrolled to do it by then. And we also scheduled another on-bike class for April 23rd for anybody else who wants to do that. And so far, I think the students have found it quite beneficial, some of them more so than others. But I think that I think it's been fun at the very least and informative in most cases.
Okay, Jeff?
And then yesterday, Champaign County Bikes did a bicycle education class in Spanish at the Urbana High School.
Cool.
There's a whole lot of unaccompanied minors from Guatemala that are in an ESL classroom, and so Leo Clovis, one of our board members, his mother's from Mexico, and so he speaks fluent Spanish. And so it was a great day. And I think there's similar situations like that in both Champaign High Schools and I think we're going to get the middle school and others. So it could be a new door to us. If anybody knows any French speakers, there's Congolese that has some of the same issues that we're trying to address. But anyway, I'm kind of excited by some steps in the new territory.
Outreach.
That's really cool.
Branch it out.
Okay, any other announcements? Okay, well, that's the end of our agenda. We have some topics for next month in April, as well as the bike master plan thing might be back by then to us. Any final thoughts before we adjourn? Okay, then I will declare us adjourned. Thanks all. Good evening.